Some of the operations shown on the table and radial arm saws are for photographic clarity. We strongly recommend that you work with the guards in place. In this video, Roger demonstrates advanced door construction techniques. For a review of measurement and layout techniques, please consult the video entitled Basic Door Construction.
I've been preparing my door stock, and I prepared it much like I did the stock for the faceplates in the cabinet we built in the first module. The importance here, though, is you notice that we clean both sides up, because when you open a door, you'll see both sides of the pieces. Stock preparation is very, very important for the doors. The width should be uniform, and the thickness should be uniform. Lengths, of course, have to be controlled as well. The importance of thickness is if you're looking for the center of a piece and there are different thicknesses, of course, the center's off. This gives us a problem in fitting the joinery and cutting grooves as well. The width is important because if we set the door for a predetermined size, or we've got a measurement, and each piece is a 1/16 wider than it needs to be, we've now made the door an 1/8 inch larger than it should be. So this can really throw off our dimensions, and it's very important that we measure carefully and make sure our stock is prepared. As we go into making this door, you'll see a number of parts and a number of operations. As you look at these parts, you're going to see several different cuts. For example, all pieces have a groove in the center, and then the rails have a tenon cut on them. These tenons are haunched or notched so they fit together correctly. And then the stiles, the vertical parts, all have a mortise cut in them, or a hole that's been bored to accommodate the tenons. This is a multi-operation type of setup, and each operation depends on the next. The first thing that we'll be doing is cutting the grooves here, and we've prepared our stock as well as some more, and we're going to take that to the table saw and begin by cutting the grooves. So we'll pick up here, set this stuff aside for now, and take our stuff to the table saw for grooving. First step in any type of raised panel door construction where you have frame and panel is to cut the groove in the pieces. There's a number of ways of doing this, and you can cut your parts to exact length and cut it, or cut the grooves and then cut them to length later. In either case, we've got a 1/4 inch groove roughly down the center, and it's important that it be centered. Ideally, we've got a quarter, 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 and if that is the case, if the piece is exactly 3/4 of an inch. Many times we get 13/16 or 25/32, and that throws it off a little bit. So we've got to be careful to center this. I've done a test piece, and I'm going to show you how the cut is made. The dado height is 3/8, and that's a standard groove size for this particular job. These are just about perfect quarter, quarter, quarter. And it's very important that these be exactly the same, because when we cut the tenon, we don't want to have to adjust the dado head 2 times, one for this dimension and one for this dimension. When your piece is a little thick, this may not be the best way to do it. There's another way we can do it with a saw blade, and I'm going to change to a regular saw blade now. I'll lift this throat plate and cut the power and change to that. We've set the saw up now with a triple chip type of cutter, so it gives a relatively rectangular or square channel cut on the bottom of the kerf. So now we've got to set this up. There's a few things that we need to consider. First, we're going to drop this blade to roughly 3/8 of an inch And if anything, we're going to be a little low. We're just going to eyeball that. And then we'll set the distance to exactly 1/4 of an inch. That is, between the blade and the fence is exactly 1/4 of an inch. Now, let's just skim it. We're at 5/16, so the blade's got to come up about a 1/16. That looks pretty close. We'll check it again. Now let's check our 1/4 inch. We're right on. That's good. Okay, we'll skin it again and check our depth of cut, just to be sure. Beautiful, we're right on. So now what we'll do is complete the cut all the way down this side. Now we turn the piece. So the other edge is against the fence now, and we'll cut it again. We've got a little bit of wood in the middle, and we'll just move the fence over, just a bit, so that we can cut that right on the center of the blade. Now, we wouldn't make this setting until we cut all the parts of it. We're just going through this on one piece, so you get the idea of how it's done. The beauty of this is we know that this and this are equal, so when we set the dado head up to cut the tenons, we only set it for 1. By using a triple chip blade, you can see that it's almost a perfectly flat bottom. There's a little bit of deviation there, probably let up on it a little bit. It's a little better here, and we could just kiss that with a chisel if we needed to. But for the sake of having equal dimensions, this is probably one of the best ways. Now I'm going to disconnect the saw and set up the dado head for cutting a tenon, and we'll go into that operation next. We've got the dado head set up now, and it's about a 5/8 cut. There's a 5/8 width. Two settings here. If we've got our rails set to length, and we should have all our parts cut to length now, and all we're concerned about is the rails when we cut tenons, because they're what gets it. We know that this tenon is supposed to be 1.5 inches long, so we can set from the outside of the dado head to the fence 1.5 inches. Now, as far as setting the height of the dado head, we use the groove in our piece. That is to say, that should just cut away the groove. And it looks a little low now, and I'll slowly set that to position. Oops, got to turn on the saw. Or plug it in, I mean. You can see that there's a little wood hanging there, and we've got to raise that a little bit. And it looks like they're not exactly equal. We'll just have to see. I'll raise that now. It looks to be close enough. That is to say, the juncture of the groove is about right. One other test we can make now is this. That suggests it's a little too tight, and that's good because we can shave a little bit off with a chisel and give us a nice tight glue joint. So this little bit of friction fitting is just about perfect. So now I think we can go ahead and cut all of the parts. All we have to do now is work our way in. After cutting the tenons, the next step we have is to cut the haunches. Now the haunch is this shoulder-like notch here. That shoulder-like notch will then go into this groove to fill that up when we make the door. I've marked this, or laid it out, on this corner, and you can see what's happened. It goes down a ½ inch, and that's so if we have to cut a rabbet on the back of the door, we clear that. And it goes over the depth of the groove. Now we can use one piece to mark the other. Let me show you what I mean. If I put these two pieces together like so, when I use a square across there, I have found exactly where they fit together. Now that beats measuring all the heck, because all we do is score a line on there. The next step then is, if we know it comes down a ½ inch, all we do is set our combination square to a ½ inch, draw a layout line like so, and then connect them. Like this. So that's the material that we have to remove. We can again use the dado head. It's just a matter of changing the position of the fence and the height of the dado head, and I'll show you how to do that with this setup here. First we'll position the fence. We've got a layout line, and we set that layout line on a point on the dado head. Lock that down like so. Now we can raise that dado head up, and I'd sooner be a little low so I can raise it a little bit as I go. Once that setting's made, I'm ready to make my tests in the setup. We can look right here and we can see that we may have to remove just a little bit more material. There's about a scant 1/16 we've got to remove. So I'll come up and set this a scant 1/16 away from the fence. Oops, wrong way. I'll just butt it to my line again. There it is. And the fit should be perfect. Now, after we've got this set, we can go to the bench and mark our mortises, because we can then cut the mortises, and we'll show you a couple ways of doing that, and then we can chisel for the final fit. So I'll see you at the bench. Here's our setup, haunch tenon, and from this we use the piece to actually lay out the mortise. I've got a couple of the stiles that will be mortised, and all I have to do is set my piece on here like so, and I can mark exactly where the mortise should begin and end just by doing this. I can turn this over now, come to the other end, Mark that. Now that the marks are set, all we have to do is decide how we're going to approach this. There are a number of ways. Probably one of the simplest bench type ways is with a doweling jig, and if you don't have a drill press or other device for mortising, this may be a way you would like to approach it. What I'm going to do is clamp my workpiece down. I have a self-centering doweling jig here that has a 1/4 inch bushing in it. That is, this is a 1/4 inch hole, and that'll fit right to the middle of the groove. Incidentally, this device is a self-centering doweling jig, so it will find the center of the workpiece. Everything is centered here. As I turn this knob, both sides pull in uniformly. I have a 1/4 inch bit here, and I'll bore one end of this. I've set this bit so that when it stops on this bushing, the desired depth is set or cut. Now I've cut one end of the over tightened it. Don't know my own strength. Now we'll cut the other end. Occasionally backing out like that will clear the chips a little better and a little faster. And I'll move this over and I'll work my way back to the original layout hole. The final setting here. I dialed this drill motor down so it's not running real fast. I don't want to go fast. I'd sooner bore slowly and get a good cut. Now I want to clear out the chips as best I can. I'll take an awl here, break out as much of this as possible. Chips tend to accumulate in here. Now, if you look in here, you can see that there's still a little roughness on the sides. And I'll try a tenon in there in just a minute. But my guess is there'll have to be some cleanup made with the chisel to get just that little bit of material out of there. So let's just try it just for the sake of curiosity. Now it wants to start, but it's not going all the way. We'll do some chisel work on this later to clean it up, and I'll show you how to fit the two parts. But I'm going to take this other piece I laid out and show you another method of cutting the mortises on the drill press. And I'm going over there now, and I'll meet you there. I brought my setup piece from the bench, and you might recall we had the layouts using the tenon and the depth. So I'll set this aside, and this will be our layout piece. What we have to do now is first set our depth of cut. We've got a fence here first that we set for the groove, and that's satisfactory. We've got it stopped at our layout line so that we've got the depth of the mortise set correctly. Now we've got to locate both ends of it. What we'll do now is turn our piece around like so and position our layout lines so that part of the bit actually extends past the line, and we'll set a stop here. The reason we extend it beyond there is there's a slight arc to the end of the mortise, and the shoulders on the tenon are square. We'll just knock those off with a rasp and they should fit nicely. We're leaving just a little bit of margin here. So I'll set that like so and clamp very carefully. Check it again. It's what I want. I think I'm ready to drill. Oops. Now I would cut all of these parts in this fashion first, and then I'll set my other layout. That is to say, I've got to mark the other end of this mortise. So I can bring this down like so, find the other end, set my stop again, and now that this stop is set, I can start drilling here and work my way down to the mating hole. Alright, so that's not going to be a problem. Keep the debris clear here. So let's go ahead and see what happens now. I'm getting close to the first hole and I don't want to extend beyond there. So I'll just go backwards a little bit and see if I can grind a little more of those chips out. You'll find that the chips get stuck in here, they wedge, and a little scratch awl or small screwdriver is useful here to remove that. I'll loosen them up, just tap it like so. And this looks pretty good. There's a little roughness in there yet, and this is pretty typical. This is cleaned up at the bench later. Now this setup is right, and I'm going to be here a while cutting the rest of these mortises, so I'll set this down and get the rest of my parts, cut those. I'll meet you back at the bench where we'll do some assembly work. I'm just taking a little bit off that was left by the dado head. And then I radius these lightly so that it'll fit the rounds of the holes left either by the doweling jig or by the mortising bit. Now I'll check it against the mortise. I doubt if it fits yet. A little tight. Now I'll work on the rough edges of the mortise. A good sharp chisel is important here. It takes the work out of the job. If you've got a dull chisel, this will not seem like fun. That's a pretty nice fit. After you fit all four corners, then that may take you a little while, it's important that you mark them, because since you're doing custom work here, everything will be just a little different. We've got A, B, C, and D here. The idea being that when we replace this or we take it apart to glue it up, we can put it back together in the same order and all the custom fits will remain. So this is all it takes. I'll be here a little while. I'm going to go ahead and work on this other one. You can go have a can of pop or something. When you get back, I'll be all done. The plain panel in a door is very simple, looks nice, but doesn't give it a decorative effect, kind of a very plain look. To make your doors a little nicer, we might install a solid wood raised panel as opposed to a plywood panel. For example, here we have a nice beveled edge panel that fits in, and it's been cut on a table saw or radial arm saw. Here's another one that's equally as nice, and it's got some scooped edges on it. This one was a series of pieces glued up, just as we did in the door or the drawer one where we glued up the drawer panel. These are loose because we haven't actually glued the whole thing up yet. We can break this down. Now, we can add even more decoration by doing something like this. If you look at the center line of this door, I think you'll see that the grain on the two sides makes a perfect pattern, almost as if it were open like a book. This is what we call book matching, and we do this by resawing. For example, in this case, we planed down a number of pieces of 5/8 stock, and that's fine. We glued up some scraps, we cheated the firewood pile, and then planed it, and we're able to use that. But in this case, we'll take a piece of 1¼ inch, cut it into 2 pieces of 1/2 inch, open it up like a book, and make this type of panel. And this is the first operation we'll go to before we actually make the panels in preparation for that. But as we proceed, you'll see how to make all of these panels in the various segments of this video. So stand by, we'll go to the table saw now and actually resaw this piece. We're set up here with a thin kerf blade for resawing, and we've got an auxiliary fence that kind of raises it up, gives a little more control over our wood. Our piece is 1¼ inch, so we're going to set the center of the blade at 5/8. That's looking at the very middle of the blade, and we're going to lock that down. And we're going to make a series of cuts from both sides. That is, we'll feed it across like this, then turn it over and feed it across like so. Obviously, we can't take it all in one pass because of the strain on the blade and the saw. So I'm going to raise the blade to about 1 inch, and I'll start with that. I've got 2 pieces here. I'm a little strong on 5/8 on one side, and I'm right at 1/2 on the other. I probably should move that fence in just a hair. It's not going to cause much trouble because remember, I've got to plane these a little bit after I go. Now I'm going to raise that blade up a little higher, and I'll continue to do that. Remember also now that I want to keep that same face against the fence at all times. So let's go ahead and make the next cut. I've got just a little bit of wood here yet, and this is a good practice. There's just a sliver there. The reason for that is I'm still only dealing with 1 piece. If I cut it all the way in half, I'd have 2 pieces, and as I squeeze it, I pinch on the blade. When I squeezed up here, I actually opened that a little bit. So what I can do now is I can start this with a utility knife, and with a little luck, I can get it started splitting right on that line. And if not, I'll get a chisel and I'll be able to pry that open. You could also saw it, but I prefer to do it this way. And I think you can see that the 2 knots register here. When I glue this into a panel and plane it to thickness, we're going to have an exact book match of grain here. And I think this will give us a real nice panel. So we'll take this to the bench and glue it up and talk more about raised panel making a little later in the series. Well, here's our resawed pieces ready for the book match. I've got my clamps ready. I'm going to prepare this into a panel. Little bead of glue. Butt them together. I've got a pencil line there as my registration mark. Ease my clamp down. Keep the bottom fairly level. Now these are a little rough yet. You might want to plane those. If you don't have a large planer, you'd plane the two pieces, then glue them together and belt sand them. If you have a larger planer, however, you can glue them up and then plane the entire unit. Either way will work all right. You just have to plan ahead depending on the equipment you have. So this panel's ready. I'm going to let it dry and get some of the other panels ready so that we can go to the table saw and radial arm saw to make up some raised panels. Our well-prepared panels are ready for raised panel work here at the table saw. One of the first setups that we're going to have to do is to kerf the piece. And we're going to raise the blade just ever so slightly and get a test piece to determine just how much we want to raise it. And this is just a scrap of wood we can use to check our setup. This is just a good way of making sure things are right. We want this kerf to be about an 1/8 deep. That's just a light 1/8. It looks good to me. It's not real deep. The next setting will be the distance to the fence. And we want a distance of 1.5 inches to the inside. That is, the distance between the blade and the fence will be 1.5 inches. Notice also we've got a plywood piece on here. We've raised this up. This will give us more control when we cut the panel. Let's check this setup. We're 1.5 inches away from the edge, and our saw kerf is about 1/8 deep. That's the first setting. So let's cut a few of these panels. We'll look at our panel and we want the exposed or the best side kerfed. And we'll do this. When you prepare the panel, check these intersections. Make sure that all the kerfs are the same depth. If the piece is slightly warped, it may be shallow here and you may have to go across again and make it a little deeper. And if those intersections look good, we're ready to go on to our next step. I've got a couple more to cut and then we'll move on to the next step. I've taken a minute to lay out the setup here. One of the considerations, of course, is this panel has to fit the groove, and we've marked that. The black area here will be what we take out. Now, a few things we have to do to set up. One of the first things is raise our blade height, and our blade height is to the bottom edge or slightly, say the middle of that saw kerf. We don't want to hit the top side, just the middle of it. Alright, now you can see the angle's been marked on here. We could copy that angle with a sliding T-bevel and set that, but what I frequently do is I set my panel right here by the blade, and then I look down here like so. What I often do is eyeball this, that is, I'll get down like so and I'll look at that blade and I'll crank it so that the blade is parallel to that angular layout line. Now, for the benefit of you who are going to try this for the first time, the angle is usually about 6 degrees. My saw says 5 right now, so it depends on how deep your kerf is, but that's a good guideline to start with. You can check on that first and then see just how close you are. It's a good place to start, or a point of departure, let's say. Now I can move this fence over, and I want to look at the blade at the table. That's where I get my layout or my setup. And I don't want to take away my entire line. That is, I want to leave just a little bit of layout line. The reason for that is I'll probably cut this 2 times. The first cut allows any burning that's going to occur to happen in the practice cut, so to speak. The second cut then is just a little bit off, and you're much less likely to have burning because you're traveling much faster and the blade can run cooler. So one other thing that we have to do, and I want to show you on a bigger piece, we're going to set this piece up for the cut as well. If you look earlier, we talked about this warp in this piece, and we're going to take that out, so to speak. We'll set this next to the fence, and we'll put this strong back here. What we can now do is bring this into play like so, and I'll start snugging this clamp up. And I want you to watch in here as I tighten that clamp. It's not magic, but it sure takes some of the headaches out. Now we pull this into a true plane. We gain about three things here. First of all, if that cup was in the board, we got to the middle of the cut, it would burn and hang up, and it would also be thinner there. Second of all, we've got what we call a miter gauge effect here, because this slides on here and this controls our cut. If you look at the opening here in the table, in the throat plate, this is what I like to call the Bermuda Triangle for woodworkers. If a piece drops in there, it's lost forever. So what we want to do is set this up, pull it into a true plane, and then make the cut. The way we're set up, I think we're ready. We'll cut the end on this piece, and then we'll cut the end on a short piece, and then go through the entire operation. Now I've got an extremely fine cutting blade on there, and I think you'll agree that things are set up pretty well. Let's bring this other piece over. I've already preset it, and we'll cut it now. If you look, you can see just a little bit of the layout line left. So I can skin this again. My real test, of course, will be how does it fit. As you can see, it's just a hair tight. So what I'll do is I'll go all the way around this panel, that is, I'll cut all four of these, and then I'll come back and make another cut. Okay, I don't have to move the fence much, so I'm going to just use my thumb as an indicator, set that. Still a little tight, so I'll move it just a little more. Cut all the way around, and I think you notice that there's still a little bit of wood there, and I'm going to raise that blade and move the fence in a little bit to accommodate that, and this will be our second pass around the panel. Some people may say, well, why the second pass? Well, if you eliminate some burn marks, you'll spend less time sanding, even though you spend more time sawing. But I've always had more fun at the table saw than I have with sanding my equipment in my hands. Very few saw marks. You can see we got to make another cut here. When two cuts are made, you can see there's almost a nice 45-degree line there. It's just a little off of 45. And we can sand that into position. We'll show you sanding a little later, but from here I'll finish these panels up. I'm going to go now to the radial arm saw and show you a couple setups for raised panels there. Raised panel cutting on the table saw was one of the things we did just recently. We're moving on to doing some raised panel cutting on the radial arm saw. Interestingly enough, most of us think of the radial arm saw as a cross-cutting machine, and when we get into that frame of thought, we're using it for about 10% of what it's good for. We've got it set up here for a little bit different operation. This was the setup piece I used, and we fed it through like so to cut it. You notice the blade's a little higher now, and the reason for that is this was a little sloppy. We had a groove here, and this is the test fit that we wanted, and you can see that the fit is just a little tight. So what we've done is raise the blade a little bit, and we've got everything set here. I want to point out one other thing. If you notice, there's a little bit of fence under that blade. That way the workpiece never dips into the blade. This is the way to set it up. Now, to feed this, we use a device like this. It's a pushing device, and this allows us to keep our hands well away. We don't use the regular guard either. We use what we call a horizontal shaping guard, and this guard attaches to the same track. You can see my plug walking away there, but I've got the machine unplugged for safety. I'll plug it in before we get ready to start here. But you can see that we've got a nice solid fitting here, and I can't get my hands into the blade this way. Between the workpiece and the guard, I've got the area of entry blocked completely. Now I'll just check to make sure that I can get my push device in there, and that's going to work fine. Notice the corner's been chewed up, and that's what it's for. It keeps your hands out of there. It's a little bit different approach to pushing, but it works quite well. Now that we've got the setup made, let's plug the machine in. Get the devices I need. Just for the sake of test, I've got a scrap here, and I'm just going to nick the corner to see how the fit is. Now I can measure this and get an idea just how well it's going to fit. Right now I've got a strong quarter, which is good. I could always take a little bit more off if I wanted to. So I think I'm ready to start. I feel pretty comfortable with the cut. I'll bring the piece up, and it's already been curved just as the pieces on the table saw were. That's nice. With a little sanding, this panel will be just right. You can see I missed my kerf there just by a hair, but on the end grain I was fine. I would sooner have it this way. When we go to the bench and do some sanding, you'll see how we'll remove that material. Now, this is one way of cutting the raised panel on the radial arm saw. I'm going to get my dado head and set up for another type of cut and come back and show you that, because there are a number of ways that you can use this machine. I think the more you understand its use, the more you can get out of the machine. So I'll be back shortly with that setup. Well, I think I've got the paraphernalia I need to set up for this dado head raised panel operation. One of the first things I've got to do is remove the blade. And replace it with this wobble dado. Now I'm going to dial this in to about 5/8. Probably difficult for you to see, but there's calibrations on here for the setting that I need. So I've set it about 5/8. I got a sleeve here that goes on first, and then I'll place the dado head on like so. Now, there's not enough threads here to use the washer, so we'll just use the nut itself and lock it up. Now I can remove these materials, set those aside. You may have noticed I brought another fence along, and this fence will be replaced. I'll loosen the table clamps here. And I'm not going to tighten this up yet because I'm not exactly sure where it needs to be. Now, let's take a look at the type of raised panel we'll be cutting. Notice that this raised panel differs a little bit in that we have a scooped, arced look as opposed to a flat shoulder. This type of raised panel gives you more of a graceful look. You'll see this cut with a shaper in some operations, but for a small shop where you have just a limited amount of tools, we can get this look using a cove type operation with a dado head. So what we'll be doing is we'll be feeding these along the fence like so, and again this fence has a little bit of clearance or a little bit protruding there so that this will act as a barrier. We can't slip this in. Now, there's 2 or 3 things that we have to set. First, we're going to set the blade to a 15-degree angle. So I'll loosen the clamp here and turn this to 15 degrees. I'll clamp that up securely. There we are. The next thing we want to do, and I'll just lock this lightly for a moment, is turn the yoke. Now, pull the clamp here and turn this to about, oh, I'd say that's 20-30 degrees off of the correct angle or the 90-degree slot. Now what it is exactly, I don't know. This is a little bit of a guess, a little bit of a guesstimate, and that's just about how we have to set this. This is not something you just do very easily. Now the next thing that happens is I can loosen it up and bring it over like so. And what we're going to see is about half this wobble dado will be hidden behind the fence. And I'll bring this down just to get an idea if this is the cut I had. And it looks to be very close. So what will happen is this will feed under here. Now the question that you're probably asking yourself now is, will I take this all in one cut? The answer is no. I'll raise this up, and with a series of light cuts I'll be able to bring this down. And we'll go through that in a minute. Now let's put the guard on and position the fence, and there's a few other small details we have to take care of. First, let's see where the fence should be located, and it looks to be right about there. So let's clamp that first. Then, as you might have noticed, things were moving on me. Didn't have it just the way I should, so I'm going to have to do a little resetting. I'm going to snug the guard up in the horizontal plane, lift this up, and just eyeball this. Looks to be about where I need to be. So I'll clamp that as well. Now, the next thing I'm going to have to do is position this and the anti-kickback pawls up so that they're not in the way. I won't bring them too high though, just enough to allow my piece through there, because they too act as an effective barrier against getting your hand in. Now you can see that the fence is holding one side of the guard up, and this side here I'm going to get a piece of tape and tape that so that it won't be in my way. Some people would take it off, but I feel much more at ease by leaving it on and just taping it up so it's out of my way, not too high, just enough. Now we'll also be using that same push shoe that we were using earlier, so we want to be sure that that will clear. And it looks like this is going to work perfectly. I think this setup is what I want, but I'll try it on a scrap. So I'll raise this. And then I'll plug in the machine. And try my first cut. This is my first cut here, and I think you'll see that it's quite a substantial cut. We'll take lighter cuts as we go along. One thing I want to point out is you can see back here how this is at a slight angle in here. And what that is, that's the angle of the dado head. So it's taking small bites, and as you feed under, it takes a little bit here and then a little more as you feed forward. So this is a very good setup, and that's why we use the dado head. All right, I think I'm ready to give it a try on one of my actual work pieces, and we'll go through the sequence. Here's one of the quarter sawn glued up panels that we made up earlier, and let's give this a try and see how it works out. That's the first cut on our way to this setup. Now I'll set this down about a half a turn and we'll take another cut on it. The next test we're going to employ is we want to just get an eye full of how much we have to remove yet to make that fit. And we've got a ways to go. So let's take it down another, half, 3/4 of a turn. Clean the dust off the tape. There's just a little snug, and that's fine because we're going to be doing some sanding yet. Now, one last thing. If you look, you'll see the striations of the cut here. That is, it's a little rough. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut at the same setting. I'm not going to change the height. I'm going to cut one edge grain and one end grain a second time very slowly, and then let's compare and see if in fact that second cut did us any good as far as saving us some sandpaper or saving us some time later on. So let's give this a try. Here's the two surfaces that I did a second time. Didn't change the height, but what you're seeing here is a little finer cut. I think you can see this a little rougher. What's happened here is that second cut, we've hit other high spots on the surfaces and leveled it out. This will save us 2 or 3 sheets of garnet and a little bit of time at the bench. Remember, woodworking's supposed to be fun, and I don't know if you like sanding, but I don't consider that fun. So we're going to try and avoid that. We'll go ahead and make these other two cuts, and then I'm going to take it to the bench. So I'll just clean this up. I built this easel when I was making some raised panel chests that had 10 panels in them. I had a lot of panels of sand, and it's made it very comfortable. I can sit here and work comfortably. I can sand and then turn the panel like so. I've got the scrap in here so I can cut larger panels as well. Works very easily. We can sand any edge. When I get to this position, one thing I wanted to point out, we missed our line. Maybe the panel is a little out of square, and you see that little bit of wood that's sticking out there. I can take a utility knife and score that lightly and remove that. Now sanding will be easy along this line. Now I'm sanding end grain here, I sanded edge grain here. I'll be watching for that line that goes out to that corner, and that's my indicator of when I've sanded correctly. Of course I have to remove my arced marks from the saw blade, but that's the other thing I'll be watching. I'm using 80 grit garnet abrasives right now, and I think you can see that this area in here between my fingers is just about clear of saw striations. Over here we have a few more, and you can see that we put an abnormal amount of wear on our sandpaper up near the edge. And since it's comfortable to work at the front, we may want to turn this abrasive around, wear out both edges before we change it. I've used 80 grit abrasives here, and this is oak, which is a relatively hard wood, and I've had very good luck, but my saw striations were small. You're going to find that if you work with harder wood, you may need to start with a coarser abrasive. A softer wood may be a finer abrasive. If you've got real coarse blade marks, then of course you'll have to work with a coarser abrasive and work your way down. It doesn't take long to master the sanding skill, but hopefully you won't be here long. It's better, while it is comfortable sitting here, it's better to be standing and doing woodworking. It's a little monotonous sanding. So tune your saw up, spend a little extra time with your setups, and you're going to be much happier, and you're going to save a lot of time sanding, which is kind of monotonous and laborious. So hopefully that little bit of advice will get you through the panel making a little faster and a little more, with a little less work. We've got everything fitted here to glue up, and we're going to glue a panel up, trap it in here, but I want to show you one thing to begin with. First, when we look at this panel, we'll see that it is in fact about 1/4 inch smaller than the groove. This allows it to shift, expand, and contract after it's been fitted, so it never breaks the joinery. There are examples of broken doors from the panels expanding in many homes, so we're going to try and compensate for that as we begin. Gluing is relatively easy. We don't need a lot. We just be mindful of where our pieces fit together. Remember, we've got custom fits as we talked about earlier. Usually what I like to do is position one of the pieces like so, and then fit the panel, making sure the grain on the panel is going the right direction. Now I can slip this other piece in like so, and a few drops of glue on this piece into the mortises. Don't need much. And quickly I turn this piece over, fit it, pull it together. Now I've got a pair of clamps here. I'll set those in so that those are positioned just about correctly. So I snug this up. I'm looking at a number of things, concentrating on what I'm doing. I want the top and the bottom of the door to line up. I've got a little bit of misalignment here. I'll tap that one. That one's good. That one looks to be pretty good. I'll snug this up, and then I'll snug this one. Now, if I use the glue sparingly, this panel will shift around. That's all right for now. We're not going to worry about that. In fact, we're going to use that to our advantage. After we got the panel centered, we can pin it in position. This one isn't glued up yet, but we have a panel that we can tap around. For example, this little shoulder allows us to tap the panel to move it wherever we need to be. And then what we do, like I said, this one isn't glued up, but we can measure our exposure, and it should be equal all the way around. Now we can be within a 16th to a 32nd, and it probably won't be visible to the eye. The bigger the panel, the more variation we have. Once we have the panel centered, all we have to do is go to the back side of the panel and pin it at the top and the bottom. Now what that does, it allows the panel to expand and contract off the center line, but the panel will never shift far enough in one direction or the other to allow air to come through. The pins I'm using are with a pneumatic pinner, and I shot one through from the back side here, and you can see that it's gone through the groove. Now what happens is it doesn't come out the front. It's shorter than the thickness of the stock, so we don't have to worry about it. All we'll see is just a little hole on the back side, and if that's annoying, we can fill it. But that's not really a problem. So what we'll do is we've got this where we want it. All we have to do is find the position of the roughly center, doesn't have to be perfect, and pin it. Now that panel is free to expand and contract off the center line. As you can see, the pins didn't come through the front. They're too short for that. You could use small nails to do the same thing. Well, that settles the problem of the panel shifting around. I think now we're ready to sand some of these doors that we've already glued up. So I'm going to prepare to do that now. We're all set up to sand here, and we're going to start with one of the panels that's glued up. These aren't quite dry yet, but this plain panel one will work for demonstration purposes. There's a little bit of irregularity in the way that these have glued up, and the back side is slightly irregular, a little better. What I generally do is sand the back side and then flip it over on a nice soft pad like this so I don't damage the back, and then I finish up on the front. And once it's all sanded, I set it aside until assembly time. And then I'll do finish sanding after I've mounted hinges and so forth, but that will be much later. We've fitted the door to the opening, and we've got some clearance here. Now I'll spend a minute or two talking about clearances on a flush door. It looks almost as if there's a total of an 1/8 inch side to side and up to down, top to bottom. This may seem like an awful lot, but remember we've got 4 pieces of wood here expanding and contracting. As the seasons change, these may swell and cause problems. Now this is the most humid part of the year for me, and so that means that these are about as wide as they're going to get. But remember also, when we put finish on, that each layer of finish will add 10 or 15 thousandths. So with 4 layers of finish here, we've cut that clearance down greatly. So these are some things you have to consider. The next thing you have to ask yourself is, what side should the hinges be positioned on? For example, most right-handers like to reach this way and open to the right. This would be called hinged right. Now in some cases you might want to match set, so you may want to hinge left on the mating one. This might be the case where you have by a bed, like a nightstand on each side of the bed. You want them to open away from the bed perhaps. So these are some considerations that you'll have to decide before you hinge. we've got this fitted pretty well. If your opening isn't square, you might find a square corner and then a square corner of your door and work from there to make it fit the opening. You can make it fit even an opening that isn't square just by adjusting or lightly planing the edges, as you saw me doing. When you've got it positioned the way you want it, then you have to decide on the types of hinges that you'll be using. In the case of this door, we'll be using a butt hinge. This butt hinge has a loose pin. Some of them have a pin that is fixed. In this case, we could take this apart and fit one part to the door and one part to the actual opening. So, depending on the type of hinge, it will affect how you mount these. Now I'm going to take a minute or two to get set up over here at the vise and get a hinge or two mounted so I can show you the technique for installation. We've attached the hinges here, and then I've removed this one. But in attaching them, I determined where they needed to be, and then I was able to mark around them with my utility knife. This gave me a line that outlined the exact shape of where it needed to be. Now, we now have to determine the depth. And what I've done is I've set this combination square to the middle of the ball on the hinge. And that means that half of the depth of the total hinge thickness will go into this piece and the other half will go into the doors or the cabinet side. So, with this in mind, we can now position this on the front and use that as a line to lay out this hinge. This will be our depth. Okay, now let's remove the other one and do the same thing. Once that's set, I now have my markings. So I can work with a chisel, clean these up, get them started. And usually what I do is try to remove a little bit of material at those corners. So the corner is now defined. Now we can check the hinge for a fit. It's a nice tight fit. Looks pretty good. I will say, do we have a uniform depth? One trick you can use is to just rub the back of the chisel on the opening, and the shiny parts will be the high parts, and you can just lightly pare those away. You can also look at the hinge to see if it's angled one way or the other. And that will give you an indication of whether it's tilting one way or the other if you have more stock to remove. Well, let's check the fit here now. We've got a little bit more to do here. I'll trim this up, spend a little time with it, and when I get it fitted, I'll show you just what the results are. But I think you can see the general attack or plan of attack for doing this job, cutting the gains for these butt hinges. So I'll spend a little more time with this. We've got the hinges on now, and they seem to be fitting quite nicely. I'm going to go over to the cabinet now and mark their position. I'm going to set 2 pieces of veneer in here, and that will raise the door up a little bit. This should just about divide the space that we have. Now you can see that the door won't quite fit, but there is just a little clearance at the top. The important thing to remember here is we need some clearance at the bottom for a couple of reasons. First of all, doors never fall up, so you can be a little tighter at the top. They'll drop down with time. So give yourself the clearance at the bottom. And now we can take a utility knife and just lightly mark the position of those hinges. What you do is just butt that knife up there and just lightly mark those. Be careful that the hinge pin doesn't throw you off. And then you'll have to sight there, look real closely and mark them a little deeper so you don't lose your positions. Now from here, I'll go ahead and get my combination square and do the same layout I did for the hinges that you saw at the vise and start working on those, and we'll see if we can't get this door fitted here shortly. I've got the last of the hinge gains cut on the cabinet side. I got one little problem here, a little piece of wood has splintered away, and I'm going to try and fix that with a little glue. What I'll do is I'll just put a dab of glue on a piece of paper, not too much. And then what I can do is put the piece of paper in under here like so and drag it on the inside there. And that should spread the glue uniformly without making a big mess. Then I'll take a little piece of masking tape and tape that into position. That's holding nicely. Now I can fit the door. I can take that off later and clean it up. Check my positioning of my hinges. I'll just try and get a couple hinges started to see how it fits, or a couple screws started, I should say. This one's a little loose yet. That's got that. Now, the fit seems to be good here. There seems to be a little clearance at the back of the door, but if you look, you can see there's a slight line, and some stock should be removed because when we put finish on, that corner may hit. So what I typically do is I mark 2 lines. First a line there, and then on the back of the door I mark the same line. That material between those lines is what I'll plane off so that I can be sure that it'll never hit. That leaves me a nice flat edge at the front. I'll never touch that line. That leaves me a nice flat edge when I close the door, so I have nothing to worry about. So I'll take this door off now and start planing it. I've got a little problem clamping this because of the hinges. I'll get a scrap block of wood. I just use this push stick. Clamp it in like so. Now all I've got to do is start working on removing that stop. Oops, a little tighter.
The door on the nightstand is now ready for final fitting. Roger then can proceed with finishing.
We got our frame and panel overlay door made up here. You might recall an overlay door usually lays over the opening. In this case, we've got a 1/2 inch all the way around. We've selected hinges and installed them on this particular door, and we have a template guide that we can use to do this. First, let's take a look at our choice of hinges for this. One type of hinge has a flat configuration, the other has a channel or an L-shaped configuration. The L-shaped configuration is designed to wrap around the mounting piece on the cabinet, and then this will mount on the hinge. The neat thing about this is we have some adjustment up and down. Now we're using the other type of hinge, which is simply a flat hinge, and it mounts on the back of the door like so. This one will mount in the same fashion, except attachment to the cabinet would be a little bit different. We can locate these in a number of ways. Depending on the size of the door, we position these. On larger doors, we might have 3 hinges as opposed to 2. The third hinge would help hold the door in perfect alignment. In an industrial setting, what typically is used is a device like this that allows you to use this as a stop. That is, we could come in on the end of the door, set this like so, and we have now positioned these 3 holes. Now we can drive those screws if we want. In your shop, you may just measure whatever you've decided, 2 inches, 3 inches, whatever it is, from the edge and position that. That will then tell you where the hinge needs to be located. And with a specialty drill bit such as this one here, which has a spring-loaded type of point that allows you to center the bit in the holes, you can drill these very easily. This simply is inserted like so. It has a spring stop that controls the depth of cut. So this is how the hinges would be installed, and this door is ready, so we're going to take it into the other room and mount it on the cabinet that's ready to accommodate this. You saw me put the hinges on this door, and I mounted the other one, but just for fun I put another drawer and door in this cabinet so you could see what happens when you change the shape or the configuration of the edges of an overlay door. We've got a book match panel in both of these, and you can see there's some different effects. I kind of like this eased edge better. I wish I'd have made 2 of those. I only made 1 of those, I made 2 of these. So guess what this cabinet's going to look like. I'll change the look real quickly just by changing the drawer and the door here. I'll use these spacers to position the door and help support it while I mount it. The check now is, do the doors and drawers line up this way, and do the doors line up across horizontally on both planes? We can take the spacers out and check. How do they work? Everything in good working order? If so, it's ready for the final sanding, dismantling, and then of course finishing. So I think this one's ready to be finished, and I'll be preparing to do that very soon.
No matter which type of door construction or style you choose, your finished cabinet will be appreciated for many years to come. The experience you have gained will now help you move on to more challenging projects as you improve your skills as a cabinet maker.